Dr. Martin Magidi, a researcher at UCT's African Center for Cities, has conducted research which examines how young men in urban Zimbabwe use soccer betting to mitigate the effects of unemployment and to earn an income. Betting on soccer games is a popular pastime in many African countries, and Magidi's research found that in addition to being a source of income, betting also promotes the adoption of digital technologies among these young men. Joining us now is Dr. Martin Magidi, who is a researcher at the Center for African Cities at UCT. Thank you so much for making time for us, Dr. Magidi. What sparked the interest to actually have research that looks into young people and their participation in gambling? Please unmute your mic there. Okay, you can go ahead, Dr. Magidi. Good morning.
Good morning. So I will give a background to the study that we conducted. So initially getting into this study, I didn't really aim to look at soccer betting per se, but it was a very broad study that was looking at how the general urban populace was surviving in an economy that was not functioning well, where jobs are very difficult to come by and where unemployment is also very high. So that was the broad aim, the objective of the study. So now getting into the study as we were conducting it, we then realized that there were a lot of themes that were actually coming up, and soccer betting was one of those major findings that we then came up with. And that's how we ended up actually narrowing down into coming up with this paper. Otherwise, it wasn't a research on soccer betting, but soccer betting just emerged as a finding from that research.
Yeah, there are the positive aspects that your research does highlight, but do the respondents say, especially the ones who went into gambling because of unemployment, that if they were to find a formal job, they would actually leave gambling to rather go and work?
Yeah, so that was the general sentiment. Most of them saying, yeah, we're just doing this. In the meantime, I think if I can get a job, if I can get a proper job, it's something that I can really consider. But there was also an element of, I would say, some of them hinting that they may even continue doing soccer betting even if they get full-time jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the other part around this, and the people who have personal experience in their families on people who are gambling, and sometimes the addiction of it is trying to find alternative ways to raise money to actually go and gamble, which sometimes leads to crime as well. Was that an aspect that your respondents spoke to at all?
I wouldn't really say it's something that we found out when we were doing our research, or probably maybe some of the respondents were a bit reluctant to share how they got their money for betting. But generally, it's something that we also know that there are a number of negatives that are associated with soccer betting, addiction being one of them, some elements of violence as well. When the team that you are supporting, that you have betted on is lost, and probably someone is trying to throw you. And yeah, so I would say we didn't really get deeper to try and find out how they were being negatively affected by soccer betting.
Yeah, some people, when you have conversations about them, about the so-called formal economy, and they would say to you that if you look at, for instance, buying shares of a JSE-listed company as an example, it's also a bet that you're taking that this company, I believe, will perform well. But it's also, of course, informed by the data to try and support whatever interpretation you have of the company that you're going to be buying shares from. Is there a conversation that the respondents had with you about where else they can apply the skill that they've now gained, including the skill of navigating the internet?
So our conversations didn't really go beyond getting to know and understand the skills that they are actually getting from soccer betting. But it was from our own interpretation, playing around and making sense of the data that we were getting. That's when we then realized that But there seem to be some positives, actually. Young people confirming that they are learning how to use smartphones, how to use laptops, how to do internet research. And we also observed a bit of like there's a lot of networking and collaboration that also happens behind the scenes before they can place their bets. And so it's something that we then came out with after sort of like interpreting the data that we had gathered.
Yeah. Finally, you mentioned in your research as well that it shows that, quote, waithood does not automatically equate to wasted or lost time. Explain to us, first of all, what waithood is and how that applies to what you have discovered in your research.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, so by waithood, we generally refer to that period that normally young people have to wait before they can sort of like transition from childhood, teenagehood into full adulthood. So the observation here was like many young people in Zimbabwe or even across the African continent as well, they tend to wait from the period they conclude their high school, their tertiary school, to sort of like get secure jobs, acquire assets, and then transition into full adults as well as starting families as well. So between that period of school completion to full transition into adult, most of them, they are not idle, they are not seated at home doing nothing, but they are involved in a number of socio-economic activities. Some of them actually venture into, like there is a range, a variety of informal businesses that some of them are actually into, and soccer betting is one of those.
Yep.
So in most cases, because of frustration and sometimes you don't really get much out of what you are doing when you are waiting. That period is normally seen as wasted time, like time that didn't really reap any returns. But then in our research here, we are arguing that but there are young people who are actually learning some skills that they may apply in other aspects of their lives during their waithood. So it doesn't really mean or translate to wasted time when someone is trying something that probably is not working well as they wait for their actual or real opportunities in life.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate that. That's Dr. Martin Magidi, who is a researcher at the Center for African Cities.